mental weight is so much more than just physical weight. Those are actually basically coping mechanisms to regulate our nervous system. Is our bodies are speaking to us long before our mind allows us to recognize what's actually going on. Rest does not feel comfortable. You're creating anticipation around things that have not happened yet.
Introduction about who you are, where you're from, and let's begin.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Danessa Gates. I'm an executive performance and leadership coach. And essentially what I do is I help high performers. I'm also helping teams and executives learn how to have sustainable performance. And so I teach them different ways to understand what has happened over time with them in survival mode and adapting under pressure and different things like that. And so that's essentially what I do.
Very good. All right. So now, like when we are going through our normal days, we have noticed that people are mentally exhausted, right? And they're like, what the hell is going on? All of a sudden they feel stressed and all of that. Why do you think so many people today feel mentally exhausted, even when life externally looks okay?
Yeah, in fact, that is my work right there. And it happened because I recognize it now because it happened to me. And so I was one of those people where it just everything externally looked great. And then I realized like there was something missing, right? Not only that, but I was just exhausted. And it's like, how do I have all of this success on the outside, but inside I'm feeling like not only is there something missing, but that I'm almost overloaded.
Overload. Yeah. So now you talk about like nervous system regulation, right? In terms of that, like what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I think what has happened over time is survival mode that you've spoken about before too, is that fight or flight, right? And oftentimes what that equates to is a dysregulated nervous system. So we have a way we want to operate, but over time, what we've done is started to internalize and normalize being under pressure and then overriding that each time. So I think that that's, when people are in survival mode like that, they learn and adapt to ways to move through and continue pushing through. And that's actually where that pressure starts to build. And in my world, what I saw with myself and my clients is that burnout starts to accumulate underneath that. And so what we're trying to do is understand, and in my work, what I've done is tried to understand what humans do to adapt to a dysregulated nervous system that's living in fight or flight. So for instance, I just gave a speech to some women's groups about some different things. They were pointed towards women, but they're very extensive with everybody, no matter who it is. And there's a lot of ways that we start to use things to calm our nervous system as regulation. So one of the biggest things is stimulation as regulation, where we are constantly looking for things to do. Our phone, we're scrolling, we're looking at the last email, we're, overthinking about the last interaction we had at work. And in reality, those are actually basically coping mechanisms to regulate our nervous system. So, and that's actually what I started looking at, were these deeper meanings behind the things that we do. So stimulation as regulation is one of them. And then another big thing I see is people pleasing. And when we people please, basically what we're doing is we feel dysregulated, so we do something that makes us feel more comfortable. And it can look a million different ways. People pleasing is one of them. And the way I think of it is people pleasing often is when boundaries are being crossed. And when boundaries are being crossed, then we start to resent people, and that resentment starts to accumulate inside of us as well. And all of that contributes to a dysregulated nervous system. So I could keep going on all of those, but essentially that is what we look at a dysregulated nervous system as something that has been overridden for a long time.
True. And like with the current society that we are living in, people are scrolling, like you said, they're scrolling and they're doom scrolling all the time, and they're all the time feeling chaotic in their mind. But
Yes.
at the start point of their day, they start with that scroll, and it's like, oh, the day is chaotic itself.
Yes,
So do
exactly.
you feel like they are disconnecting with themselves on a day to day with this current behavior?
Yes, and in fact, I think that's actually what's become really normalized is that disconnection, because when you are, so coming back to the stimulation is regulation, right? When humans don't have something to manage, they become very uncomfortable. And that's like, people, I'm a longtime yoga teacher, and I talk to people all the time about meditating, and they're like, absolutely not. I cannot do that. I have no idea I can't sit still. I can't. I was like, well, there's a reason for that. And oftentimes it is a dysregulated nervous system, to our point, right? But yeah, like silence is very, very hard for myself included, right? But then I started looking at like, why is it so tough for me to just sit and have, but it's because, and especially now in our society with all of the stimulation we have with our phones, with computers, with tablets, with TV, with every single thing we have going on, we started to use that as a way to say, well, I'm just not, I don't, I need a way to feel calm. And so we did that, right? And over managing, over monitoring, scrolling. I mean, there's a ton of different ways we try to stimulate ourselves in order to calm the nervous system and feel regulated, because that silence is so uncomfortable.
Yeah. So like the default setting is, okay, scroll just to feel good. Like even
That's right.
pre-bed, they might be like, okay, I'm just gonna scroll for a bit just to calm myself down. But
Yep.
no, it's just they think like I've with my clients as well, they consider this as like a self-sabotaging act on a day-to-day. And so I believe that self-sabotage doesn't happen. It's just that people haven't found better practices to replace their old behavior with. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree with you. I think self-sabotage is a label that we've kind of overused a little bit. And I used to use it on myself, and it didn't feel like it fit. But what's actually happening, right, is we're just trying to feel okay. I mean, at the end of the day, we just want to feel normal. But what we've normalized in order to feel normal are coping mechanisms that are just not healthy for us. And it's not because we're sabotaging. I think it's just because we want that regulation. We want that feeling of calm, and we found ways to do it that maybe have started masking what's actually going on inside.
And so what would be some good practices to replace that old behavior with? What would you say?
So what I usually teach my clients is how human behavior shifts when you're under pressure. That's essentially what we talk about, because I want them to start to recognize that in themselves. And so what I focus on, right, because this stuff is pretty heavy. When you're talking about your internal body, I mean, some people are kind of like, by the end of it, they're just like, holy crap, holy, right? But honestly, it's actually quite simple. What you're trying to do is what I call micro interrupters. And so basically what we're trying to do is identify your patterns and then find a way to interrupt those patterns. And then once you interrupt the pattern, you start to create those more regulated ways and add in different things to find ways to regulate you that aren't so dysfunctional, right? And causing all of that override and that burnout to accumulate inside you. So for me, it can be, what I teach my clients, it can be as simple, Dilshan, as a breath, a grounded breath, right? Or just understanding your body sensations. That's another big one. Like, what's actually going on in my body? And, I think you had alluded to this in some of the things we talked about, but we are so disconnected from our body. We really let our mind dictate almost everything, right? And so a lot of what I do is interoception with my clients so that they can learn what their body is actually saying. Because what I think happens is our bodies are speaking to us long before our mind allows us to recognize what's actually going on. And so I want my clients to pay attention to their bodies. That's going to be a big thing. And then the other thing is to start to do those interrupters. And again, very simple things, just the breath, just the body sensation, taking a moment to rest, responding rather than reacting, different things like that. And so it's actually much simpler than it sounds. It's about micro shifts, right? And then what starts to happen is every time you interrupt that pattern, consistency, right? We all know consistency is a big one. I don't think we can ever really get away from that as far as making change in our lives. We need consistency. And so once you do the interrupter more and more, now you're interrupting the neuro patterns, you're interrupting the way your body processes. For me, it was food. Every facet of my life was changed by finding these interrupters. And once you start to do that and you train your body to look at what's actually happening and listen to your body, then you are able to use a more, to regulate your nervous system more. And each time, right, it stacks that little one. I used to say to my yoga students, 1% shift, a 1% shift. We're not looking for major change because that doesn't work, right? As you know, and you're in fitness and all the things, you can't make these leaps and then expect everything else to just come along with you, right? Because, yeah, right, so.
Yeah, it's not going from 0 to 100, it's just 0 to 1.
That's right, that's right.
That's
Every time and repeat it over time, and then those things get easier. And then what I might do is have somebody like try to find a little regulation menu, so to speak, the things that they can go to and replace with scrolling, or replace, like, so for instance with myself, I have a little exercise routine, a very light one that I do in the morning that's like 5 to 10 minutes long. I have my phone on airplane mode every night, and so before I ever take my phone off airplane mode, I do that little workout. Because I don't want to wake up and be like, right into the phone, right? Because that's what we do, and immediately, honestly, and what's funny, and I'm sure you've seen this with the people you work with, is you actually get more anxious. You're just creating more anxiety by constantly going to your phone and doom scrolling and doing all of the things. So it's just more dysregulation, and we want to find a way to out of that.
Yeah, and like what you said, do you think that like in the first 20 minutes of your day, if you instantly start scrolling, does that, now let's say you see something negative, all of a sudden within that first 15 minutes, do you think that carries on for the rest of the day? Do you believe that?
100%. 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean, I know for me personally, I honestly personally stopped watching the news a long time ago because I could not. If I watched the news, it would just make me sad about the world and just the state of everything. And then you sit with that, and it's like, I don't want to be ignorant, but I feel like there are different ways you can move those things around so that it's not the first thing you see. And you actually, one of the other things that I teach my clients is something called a daily containment ritual. And what that is where you take a loaded item, let's say it's emotionally loaded, something like scrolling where you're like, this makes me feel icky by the time I look through it. I don't, and sometimes people need help recognizing that it makes them feel icky, right? They don't actually see that or are not aware of that. Yeah. But what they can do is take that item and put it in a container. So what I do is I say, okay, this is, for instance, I'm my mom's POA. She's in an assisted living facility and I take care of her. And it's like, it's very loaded. It's my mom, right? And so everything that I have to do, even answering emails, are tough because it's like, oh, my mom, I gotta make sure she's okay. I mean, there's all this emotionally loaded stuff. So instead of dwelling on it, because that's what we tend to do, emotional stacking is another big thing I talk about, because it's not the task itself, it's all the emotion we've created around the task. And so what daily containment does is it takes the facts and removes the emotion, and it says, okay, I've got 5 minutes, and what is actually being asked of me here? Is it an email I have to answer? Okay, cool. But instead of creating all the emotion around the email, well, it's from this person, and they may have said it this way, and it's like, no, all I have to do is read an email. And that's kind of like what I teach my clients too. That's just one of the ways, is like, can you contain the things that affect you? So for instance, scrolling, could you say, okay, I'm not going to do it for the first half an hour of my day. I'm going to allow myself to do it. This isn't about restriction, but I'm trying to add other ways in later that I can use instead of just scrolling all the time. And then you stop relying on those things as much. So it's a whole process, right? There's a lot there, but it's actually easier than it sounds, because it is just those easy micro shifts. It's just about consistency.
Yeah, like the moment we start letting our emotions take over, things starts happening. That's the main.
Yes, yeah. And especially if we've had years of override, right? I had decades of overriding myself. That's a really big one for me, and that's kind of how I position everything, is what we've been doing in order to feel comfortable with ourselves is overriding our signals forever and ever and ever. And so what I'm trying to get myself back to and my clients is, can you recognize the signals of your override? What does that look like for you,
So like now the client might be like, okay, so how do I like gain awareness of this? Because they don't know what they're doing, right? So how do they do that?
How do they recognize it in themselves?
Recognize their own patterns.
Yeah,
Is that
so we actually dig into that, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of the biggest step is teaching people awareness. Awareness is going to be the
awareness?
biggest thing. It's not the only thing, but it's the biggest thing because it's going to be the thing that reveals to you personally what are you're using in order to regulate yourself and what have you been overriding forever. Well, what are these things that are going on inside you that you've been overriding? So that's going to be unique to everybody, but then the ways that we micro interrupt it, those are going to be unique to people too. But the point is they can be very easy, like that breath, like responding rather than reacting, taking a moment, different things like that. And again, that's going to look different for everybody, but they kind of slot into the same type of thing where it's just kind of like, take a minute, just take a second and see what's going on. And so that awareness, I think, is honestly the key to understanding your override and then transforming it and rewiring it. So I have 3 pillars I use: reset, rewire, reclaim. And rewiring the nervous system is a very large part of my personal program for myself and my clients.
So do you have like that's the power of having a coach, right? Like who sees those patterns early on? Did you
Yes.
have a coach like early on who went took you through this journey?
Not this particular journey, but I have
Okay.
had, so this was actually all me.
Okay.
Because I've always been a really kind of introspective person. I've always been really into knowing myself and understanding myself. But I have had many coaches and many, many years, over a decade of therapy. So I really cared about what was going on with me, and it didn't make it any easier. It's still a very long journey, right? I'm 44 now, so it's like, okay, like it feels like it's been decades that I've been dealing with that, but and understanding myself. But yeah, like I feel like those different things are what having a coach is so important because they get you to see things that you've been overriding. Again, it comes back to override. You've normalized a way to look at your life. And what a coach does, and especially myself, is I'm gonna kind of pick those out and be like, okay, but let's actually look at that, right? You give me a scenario and I'm like, okay, but let's back up. Because at the very beginning of that, right? Like, and because we just would pass over it. And those are other examples of override, Dilshan, is like when you're tired but you push through anyways, or when a task could be delegated but you're like, I'll just do it myself, or I mean, there are so many ways, like, this doesn't feel right inside me today, I don't want to do this, but I need to, it has to happen. We put urgency around it, we say it has to happen instead of just stepping back and saying, okay, well, what's actually going on here? And that's what I get people to do.
Why are people tired all the time? Now I've noticed, I've heard a lot of my clients say this as well at the start. They're like, I'm tired, and like they're not physically overworked because they are in a desk job or something. They're doing something less active than they were previously. But why is that happening? Why are people feeling constantly tired?
Yeah, I mean, isn't that interesting too? Because
That's
we've been normalized to believe that physical tiredness is the only thing that matters. Physical override is what causes tiredness, when in reality, it's all the things I've been talking about: your emotional stuff, your mental loops, like all of those different things. So, for instance, I had a couple of things. So, why do I think people are tired? Well, I think that there's a few very specific reasons. One is anticipatory load, which is basically the idea that you're creating anticipation around things that have not happened yet and you do not have evidence for, but you've created a story. So, for instance, I had ADT coming to my house a few weeks back, and they give you a 4-hour window, and it's like, okay, I'm going to arrange my entire day around this guy's 4-hour window. So I didn't eat. I was watching the window. I'm like, he's going to have a problem with my address, and I'm creating this mental conflict in my head. And then none of that happened, Dilshan. He showed up, he fixed the thing, it was over. It took 10 minutes, but it was like I had literally spent all day thinking and anticipating about what this interaction was going to be like. So that's the first thing I think causes tiredness, and we don't even recognize it. We think that's an everyday thing, right? It's just, another adulting thing we have to do, The emotional stacking is the other one that I talked about. Similar to anticipatory load, but actually it's like, the task itself is not exhausting you, like writing an email, but it's, all the emotional stuff around it. My mom, my kid, the parents, or the school's calling, whatever it may be. And then we create all this meaning around it when in actuality it was answering an email. So
Yeah,
you could see how that would cause tiredness, right? That's the big one. And then the stimulation is regulation that we talked about, where we're using scrolling, we're using different things just because silence makes us feel so uncomfortable. So imagine all of those things that you're adding in, that's going to start to accumulate. That's going to start to mean something inside your body. But we've never put a high price on that. We've never said that that's what we should be looking at. And thank God we're having conversations like this now, because this is the transformation we needed in our society, was to understand the importance of emotional weight. Mental weight is so much more than just physical weight, right? And especially as a fitness guy, you know how that goes. And you can see that there are other things impacting our bodies. And so those are really the big three things. And then that people pleasing too, because what happens once we start people pleasing everything is obviously our boundaries are being crossed, and oftentimes that leads to resentment, and resentment is a sign that honesty has been overridden for a really long time, because we're not being honest about our needs, we're not being honest about our boundaries, and all of that is weight, all of that is work. So imagine that all of those things going on inside you, that causes tiredness, that causes exhaustion.
tired is in the mind. A little bit.
Yeah, it's
So now
powerful,
all this
right?
powerful, very powerful. So now all these people, they're very driven people who like struggle to slow down. Why do you think the ambitious ones, why do they struggle to slow down, Danessa?
I think that there's a lot of reasons. I actually work with high performers, right? That's kind of my niche, is what I look at, because I considered myself the same. I was a very ambitious and driven person. I think that they struggle with it a lot because they have created a way of seeing themselves, and these are the things that they need to do. And it's also what they've been placing on themselves. But another really big one, now that you said that, is the culture that they're in. And if the culture has, it could be a family culture even, but I'm kind of speaking to a corporate culture or a business culture, that where the leadership has taught you that this is the way you should be responding. And they've normalized that, oh, when you are up at 10 o'clock at night answering emails, you're rewarded. It's understated, but it's rewarded. You don't really see it called out, but you're basically told that, hey, if you're always on, if you're endlessly available, you're the good one. You're the one that's going to get the promotion. You're going to, and then in the end, we probably know, like, when you get that promotion, what is it really? It's more work because you were the one that would take on that stuff. So I think that's especially why high performers feel the weight of that. Plus all the things that I was just talking about. They all have that stuff going on inside them. They've been creating a pattern of override and internal pressure. And in fact, I love sports. I'm a huge sports fan. And that's actually one of the ways that I've seen the parallel. So I'm pretty good at picking up on patterns. And that was a big one that I saw was as compared to elite athletes and executives. When they are, I can compare them because when they're under pressure, what they do next determines how they're seen and how they're received and how they feel, what they accumulate, what they continue to take on. And so if you see, for instance, I'm a huge tennis fan and a golf fan, if they mess up a shot, the next thing that they do, you'll find that if you watch them, they're doing things to try to regulate themselves. But in actuality, almost every time I've seen somebody throw a racket or throw their club or get dysregulated in the moment, they lose. They lose the match, they lose the game, they lose whatever, because it wasn't about what they did. It was about the moment after they felt the pressure. Could they catch that moment of pressure and respond differently? So sorry, I went off a little bit on a tangent there, but that is kind of how high performers really, I think that they take that on. It's almost like this, because they've been taught that, and especially in Western society, we've been taught that beating yourself to death at work is like the best way to show that you care,
You care. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, do you think they don't understand what rest is anymore? Or like, what's happening there?
100%, because again, stimulation is regulation. Rest does not feel comfortable. It does not feel comfortable. It's like, I should be doing something. Should. I should be doing this. Oh, I shouldn't be resting. I've got this to do. And that's exactly that same mental loop that keeps exhausting you. So you're not actually getting real rest. And especially, I mean, how many high performers have you talked to and ambitious people that have trouble sleeping? Like
Yo.
all of them, like
All
like all of
yeah.
them, so it's like, that's what's happening, right? I mean, they don't rest because they're continually mental looping things and holding stuff inside, and until they're made aware that that's happening, they're probably going to blame external stuff. And blame's a relative word, but you know what I'm saying. They're going to point to external things as the reason when really it's about the override inside.
Inside. Like now you spent 20 years in corporate, right? So what
I did.
patterns have you repeatedly like seen in these high performing individuals?
I think I personally, it's kind of what I've already alluded to, which is the normalizing of overriding yourself. Because
Right.
all of the executives I work for, I was on executive teams and I was in sales ops, so I did a lot of supporting of executive teams, analytics, things like that. And the way that they dealt with stuff is how I learned to deal with things. And a lot of times I would encounter leaders that you didn't quite know who you were going to get that day.
Okay.
And that taught me to always be on my toes, always be ready. I mean, like, your whole system is like waiting for this other shoe to drop, basically. And so I think that's honestly what it is leadership's own internal override affecting the culture. So I just wrote a piece for Authority Magazine about how you build culture from the top down and what things you can do to change that. And the biggest thing is to teach those executives how to catch their own internal override, because it just trickles down. And then that person learns it, and that person learns it, and then the next person says, well, that leader was like that, so I've got to do those things. And it's just, it basically accumulates. It
Okay.
accumulates and it stacks. And I was using all those words with burnout, emotional stacking, accumulation inside. And look, we're using it now in the same process outside in what the patterns that we see.
So what does high performance look like for you now?
The biggest thing for me personally that has helped is responding rather than reacting is the biggest one, is to take the pause. Right? To take the pause, even when we're telling ourselves, I cannot pause. I cannot pause here. I have to go. I have to move. It's like, no, take it back, because actually what happened to me, Dilshan, is I probably doubled my energy. And I couldn't believe it, because being such a ambitious person, I was like, if I'm not busy all day, there's not enough getting done. There's not enough getting done if I'm not busy all day. So now that I don't do that, I mean, I've literally looked at it like, okay, this is my capacity and I am not using it all today, because I know if I keep pressing past that capacity, I'm going to pay for it medically, emotionally, mentally, and physically later. So that's a big one in my head, because I saw the effects. I actually had a big health scare, and that was what led to me starting to do this work. But anyways, I think that those things for me are the biggest thing, is the daily containment ritual. Taking those emotionally loaded items, because for me, I was kind of cranky. and a lot of items were emotionally loaded for me. So I had to really learn to say, okay, Danessa, that all you have to do is answer an email. This isn't war and peace, right? Like, it's like, it's just one thing, but I was stacking so many things with it. And so what I had to learn was that daily containment. So for me as a high performer, I think that looking at the facts and removing the load that we've created around it was the biggest thing that led to me doubling my energy.
Less, doing less.
Less is more, right? Less is more.
It's more, less is more. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So now, with what the society is giving us as well, and it's a whole different thing, right? They phrase this as well a lot more. Like, what do you think is harming people, like internally?
I mean,
It's
I
different in
think
every
the over.
country. It's
What was
different
that?
it's different in every country, but
That's true.
what
That's
you have
true.
seen.
I mean, I think to your point, right, there's going to be, it boils down to the four things I mentioned, right? All of that override inside is really what it comes down to. Now, for each person, that is going to be very different. Somebody in another country that is struggling to find food is not going to be thinking about the same things as somebody maybe in America and Western society that isn't struggling with those things. But the accumulation of whatever that override looks like inside is still the same. And so that they're basically, I think what it boils down to is separating what is your body actually saying before your mind just goes ahead and takes over. Because when that happens and your mind starts to take over, then the body becomes a back seat. It already has been a back seat,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so I think what it really boils down to is finding that interoception between your mind and your body and learning how to see and be aware of the signals so that you can do something about it.
Do something. True. Can you remember when we first jumped on the call? I told you we roughly have about 4,000 weeks. You were like, really? And you were like, so
Yeah.
what do you think? You can remember. And like, so how do you think people should live their life differently? Like, how should they think about their life differently?
I think it's not a thinking thing. I don't think it's about how you think, right? I mean, well, let's put it. It is about how you think, but I don't think thinking is the solution, right? Like I think, as I say, I think it really comes down to it really comes down to changing. It really comes down to being aware of and being intentional about what you want. So let me put it this way. The path that I see with myself and with my clients is awareness first. And then we try to look at where we can interrupt those patterns. And then we start to interrupt those patterns to rewire. And then we look at how can we reclaim something, all of those things. But I think what we want them to get to is to see in themselves what they have been doing to override their own pressure. And then what's interesting, Dilshan, is when you do that, the things that really are fulfilling and bring you true joy, they start to reveal themselves because your body is no longer overriding everything, right? I mean, think about high performers and ambitious people. When they have joy, that's one of the biggest patterns I've seen is when you have joy and success, you just pass over it. Oh, whatever. Anyways, moving on. Next thing, next goalpost, next this, right? And what we want to do is kind of back up, slow down. I don't like saying it like that because high performers are like, dude, I can't slow down. And I thought the same thing. I was like, I cannot slow down. I am not going to get enough done, like all the things. And none of that was true. But it was what I was telling myself. And when I did truly start to slow down a little bit, the really good stuff that I had been kind of overriding forever started to blossom.
Smell the roses, right?
If that answers your question.
Yep. I mean, celebrate the wins along the way. Staying in pursuit.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, that absolutely. And I mean, I struggle with that because I was like, I'm an ambitious person. I don't want that to change. Right? I mean, I was really, really like aware of that. And it didn't. None of that changed. And in fact, that even after doing the work, I was so surprised because I was like, I thought for sure I'm going to become this like slow person, like I'm not going to do anything fast anymore. I'm not going to be efficient, and none of that happened. That was more of that anticipatory load, right? Where I was like, well, if I do this now, these 10 things are going to happen. And it's like, no, Danessa, that's not actually what happened, right? And in fact, I love what you said. And every day I write down my 10 wins every day.
Wins.
And that's a really big one for me. Just as like a tips or tricks. I don't really get into tips and tricks so much in my coaching because we look at such a deeper level. But that big one is a big one for me. And the other one for me that might resonate with people is rest is a business strategy. So that's a really big one for me because it told me like I'm way better. I have way more clarity when I'm not tired, when I'm not exhausted. And that's another thing, like, especially for high performers, if you want to get better, if you want to sustain the performance that you're at now, you've got to address this. You've got to address this stuff, or else your performance or your longevity is going to be affected, both professionally and personally.
You have experience with yoga as well, right? Do you think it's a good practice to have in a day?
100%. And in fact, I teach a nervous system regulated version of yoga. And for a long time, I was a flow and a Bikram teacher, so for about 12 years. And then in the last couple of years, I've obviously with this work, I've started looking at it really differently. But yes, overall, yoga is a beautiful practice because it asks you to slow down and pay attention. And that's exactly what I'm asking you to do, right? So but again, like meditation, it's one of those things, especially with Westerners, they're like, absolutely not, And it's like, no, you really need to give it a whirl, But I think people need the stigma taken out of it because people are like, oh, yoga, it's slow, it's not fun, you're doing all this, like, or whatever, or slowing down doesn't sound fun. And I thought all the things I said to you, I thought that same stuff when I started this. I was like, I am not going to be a person I like, and I like myself so much more now. So much more because I unstacked all the weight, and that wasn't physical weight.
So what would you say to someone that who actually they need to change, but they keep postponing their life? What would you tell them?
I would tell them that things don't get better until you recognize what's actually going on. And so I think awareness is the first thing. I think they need to find awareness. And I actually do 30-day prompts on Facebook quite often, actually every month. And I start asking people those types of questions like, where did I tighten in my body today? And that's it. Like, you keep it super simple. Where did I override myself when I knew I didn't want to do it, but I said yes anyway? Different ways to recognize what's actually going on. And maybe the first question I would ask is, where did I override myself today? And just leave it at that and see what people come up with, And oftentimes that will lead to, oh, this, and oh, I didn't realize I do that. And again, Dilshan, it really comes to going inside because we've become such an external society that we need to start coming back to ourselves. And I think that's really the solution. That sounds wide, but it really is about
very
that.
true. I believe this as well.
Yeah.
Peace comes from within, always.
Yeah.
Now
Agreed.
people say
Agreed.
they have to go on vacations, they need to go out party and just to gain that break. But they know that they have all the answers within themselves. Now with what you said, override, find out, ask the question. Because questions are the answers, right? And once we don't ask ourselves enough questions, that we just keep running towards everything that comes our way.
That's right. And I mean, how many people have you met or know that as soon as they get off vacation, they were actually sad they went on vacation because they knew what they were going to come back to? They didn't rest. They didn't rest on their vacation. And I can attest to that 100%. And especially when I drank, I don't drink anymore. But when I did, it was like, I never got any rest on my vacations. And then I would come back to a pile of work and more of the same override because I wasn't addressing this. I was only listening to this,
So now you said you quit drinking. How did that happen?
Oh gosh, wow. So it'll be 5 years on October 4th that I have not drank. It was destroying me, I can tell you that. And what's interesting is actually since I've done this work, I haven't actually thought about that question. So that is a really great question. I think what happened was, you know how they say, especially when you drink, it causes anxiety, especially like hangxiety, they say, like the next day, hangxiety or whatever. I really experienced that. And I think what alcohol personally did for me was double time all the mental loops and all of the override. And I can only look back and say that now, but I know that it was causing me to dislike myself a lot. And I wasn't myself. And when I would go to work things or corporate events and I would drink, it was very performative, right? It was very performative. It was for somebody else and it wasn't for me, right? And so I started realizing like the things that I'm doing are so external and as internal as I had thought I always was, right? It was kind of revealing to me to be like, you still got a lot to learn here. And removing alcohol, that was its own journey, right? So you're taking the Band-Aid away and now you have to face what's actually coming up. And I think that was probably the most revealing thing that led to me doing this work as far as what was actually going on inside me. Now, I was diagnosed with high blood pressure in 2024 and I'm only 40. I was 42 at the time. So that was a huge blow. I mean, that was a huge, huge blow to me because I'm athletic. I like sports. I like being out. I like working out. And it was just like, it felt like I couldn't do anything without my blood pressure spiking. And that led me to be like, okay, what is going on here? Because I had had every medical test you could think of, every brain scan, every blood test, everything. Nobody could figure out what was going on. And at the end of the day, it boiled down to my stress and anxiety. And I had to start looking at what was causing my stress and anxiety. Because at the end of the day, a week-long vacation isn't going to give that to you.
It's in the daily things, the small things. So what are few
Yes.
small things that people can do on a daily basis, understanding that this is the way that they live now, and they live their life in a well-regulated state? What are few things that we can do?
I mean, I personally think the pause is the biggest deal because we don't do it. So even if it was for 15 seconds, just pausing and asking yourself, what is my body saying to me? So for instance, with the body sensation thing, are your shoulders tight? If you just checked in with yourself, is your jaw locked? Are you holding your jaw? Are you placing your jaw? Does your chest feel heavy? When you're doing this task, does your stomach react? One of the biggest discoveries I had was I was holding all of my tension up in my upper body. And when I started letting it sink to my body, I felt like a new person. It sounds really weird, but it was so crazy how much tension I was holding in the top of my body. And so I really, honestly, for like a tips and tricks type thing, I think that is the biggest thing is, what is my body saying to me? I would actually boil it down to a very simple question like that. Pause and ask, what is my body saying to me right now? Where do I feel sensation? And I would leave it at that. Then just start with that. Because that question is going to start to reveal more and more. And it's like, oh, my body's feeling this way. Okay, well, if my body feels this way, then what was I doing when my body felt that way? Oh, okay, well, I was compromising my boundaries, or I was doing this, or whatever it may be. Because it's a deep thing you can dig into, and I think we need to start small again, right? You don't want it to be overwhelming. We're trying to get rid of overwhelm, not add it, right? So you've got to be very gentle with yourself, and I think it just comes back to, what's my body saying? What are the sensations I'm feeling?
Love that. So I want to add for what you said earlier with the 10 things that you write down in your achievement list. This is actually very true. I heard this from, Dan Martell. Do you know him?
I've never heard of him. No.
Look him up. He's good. All right. What he said was in an
Okay.
event, when I went to these networking events, he said, maintain an achievement list in your phone. Record all the things that you achieved in your lifetime. That way, over time, you celebrate your wins more often, and you know that you are this person. Like, you've done so many things, and you're not putting yourself down on a day-to-day, and you are like, no, more things will happen along the way, but I need to appreciate what I have done so far. So I pat myself on the back. And I think journaling, do you think that would be another good practice for people to do as well on a day-to-day?
Journaling is very good. Very good. Yes. Because you're giving yourself the moment to pause, right? It all comes back to pausing for a second and saying, okay, so I'm going to write down what happened to me today, what's going on, and then things reveal themselves. So yes, journaling is fantastic. I love it. I used to teach workshops on journaling because they are very cool. And it's a very self-aware practice. It's a very revealing thing. And one thing just about those 10, recognizing your wins and stuff. And I read something the other day because I'm on Insight Timer. It's the meditation app. And it said, gratitude makes you happy for what you already have. Like, it makes your life okay just as it is. And so sometimes it's worth stepping back and saying, okay, I did these things and I'm really grateful I got these done today, because old Danessa would have never even acknowledged that I did those things well, right? And so you just start to change the process in your body. And even that, Dilshan, is rewiring your nervous system.
Rewiring. Because you begin to see success everywhere because you appreciate all the things that you have.
That's right.
And then you're like, everything.
And then
I
the
did
definition
good.
of success changes, right? Before it was, I gotta kick my own butt to make sure I do this and push through and do and be like this person and that executive and this leader. And when in reality, it's like, okay, I've already done a ton. And I wasn't giving myself credit for any of that, right? So I think that is a really big one.
Powerful.
Gratitude.
Thank you so much. So where can people find you, Danessa? Where can they find you?
So the best place to find my work is on LinkedIn. That's going to be the best place where you can see the full gamut of what I talk about, my type of content. And then what I do is in my book my services on LinkedIn, you can book an executive clarity call, which is just a quick 15-minute call to just chat and see what's heavy for you right now, what's feeling like it's causing the most heaviness in you, and then we just go from there. We just have a good conversation and see what's going on. So if they do want to chat with me, that's the best place. DMing on LinkedIn, everything on LinkedIn.
Everything on me. Love that. Thank you so much for your time today. That was very valuable, very insightful.
Absolutely.
I gained
Thank
a
you,
lot of things.
Dilshan.
I'm gonna revisit back into the achievement list as well. Start
Wonderful.
trying to
That's
think.
awesome. Thank you.
You reminded me of that.
It's pretty interesting stuff, right? Yeah. It's
It
like
is.
you have
It
to go
is.
back
Like
sometimes.
we are
Yeah.
always like finding like tangible or things to do on a day to day. That's why I asked you that final question as well. I thought, like, if they had these
Yeah.
practices on a day, they would feel good about themselves on a day to day. And it's about
Yeah.
revealing ourselves
Yeah,
over time.
exactly.
That's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those things that you're mentioning are really good. And I think that's just the reason I couple it with the question that you ask yourself. So it's kind of interesting because even if you journal, you could ask yourself that question on a
That's
daily
true.
basis because that's what starts to go inside too and reveal what's being overridden. So I love what you're saying because I think even within the 3 to 10 things you did great today or the things that you're grateful for, that's another big one. If it's not
Yeah.
just your wins, it's what are you grateful for that
Yeah.
day, or the journaling. Those are all great ways to start revealing what's going on here.
That's cool. Very powerful. Thank you again, Danessa. Anyways, I'll see you.
Absolutely.
All right. So.